Mastering. What is it and what is it not? It's time to discuss this and go deep and geek. Hi guys, and welcome to Geek Talk, where we go deep and geek about everything related to pianos, keyboards, synthesizers, and music production. And today it's all about mastering. What is it and what is it not? The goal of this video is to speak generally about the subject of mastering. This will be a very general layman's term type discussion. It is my goal for you, if you're not a musician or if you're a novice or someone who's getting into music production and you're not familiar with, you've heard of the word mastering, but you're not really clear on what it is my goal that hopefully by the end of this video, you will have a more or less general understanding as to what it is and what it is not. So when it comes to the production of a record or an album, there are many steps or many parts to the chain. And of course, music production, modern music production has changed the way we work, and we're not going to delve into that too deeply because that is another subject. But generally with making a record, there's the writing process, the pre-production, the production, the mixing, the mastering. And of course, these days, due to modern technology, a lot of these processes have been streamlined, and there are a lot of people now who kind of work within one system, a DAW, digital audio workstation, and they will kind of produce as they mix, as they master. And there's a lot of talk as to whether that is a good way or a bad way. Personally, I don't like to work like that because I feel it's, although we can technology allows us to technically work within this way, I find it's more of a, for me, by doing everything at the same time, we lose focus on what the separate parts are. And maybe that's because I'm quite old school in my approach, but there are a lot of the younger producers and people who got into music production recently who are doing fantastic mixes and tracks, sort of just starting off producing and mixing and mastering all at the same time. But that, of course, is Geek Talk, and of course this is Geek Talk, but I want to talk really generally about mastering. So mastering, what is it and what is it not? So let me give you my explanation of what mastering is. Mastering is a tonal balancing process to ensure that the completed piece of music translates well over a wide variety of music playback systems. Now, what do I mean by that? A tonal balancing process. Well, really, when you make a record, the final stage, or one of the final stages, is the mixing, and you're all familiar with what a mix engineer does. Usually you see them sitting behind those desks. That is the sort of vision that the general public and people have of a mix engineer. Of course, the reality of that is not quite the same these days, but the mix engineer really is, in layman's terms, so you've recorded the drums, the guitar, the piano, you've got all these instruments, you've got the vocals, and the mixing engineer's job is to really create the mix. He sets the sound stage. Now, if you're not a musician, but you like music, when you listen to music, you know you've got the headphones on, or you're listening to it in stereo through speakers or surround sound, and you've got all the different sounds on different sides of the sound stage. So you might be listening to it and you'll hear a guitar there, and you'll hear a voice there, and you know, there are, once again, when it comes to mixing is an art. It takes years and years to sort of master it, and even some of the world's best mix engineers like Dave Pensado will talk about how they're always learning, and you never stop learning. But it is really the mix engineer's job to make sure that the song is presented in its best possible way. So when you're listening to a finished piece of music and you are enjoying it, that is a combination of factors. It's a combination between good performance, good sound selection, many different things. But the mix engineer is the guy who mixes the separate elements so that you have the finished record. So he will balance the drum to the snare, to the bass, to the vocals, and pan things out so that certain things sit within certain parts of the sound stage, as we call. That is the mix engineer's job. Now, when the mix engineer is finished doing that, as I say, guys, I'm talking in a very simplistic form here. He then sends that mix, which is finished, to a mastering engineer. The mastering engineer's job is to make sure that this song that he's got, that is now being mixed, it's finished, will now translate well onto various different types of playback systems. Now, what do I mean by that? Remember, when you listen to music, there are many different ways to listen to music. These days, a lot of people listen to music on earbuds, and there is a problem with people listening to music too loud through prolonged periods of time, but another story. A lot of people, as I say, these days we're on our phones and we listen to it with earbuds or headphones, but there are people that you listen to it in your car, you listen to it on speakers, your mum's kitchen radio. There are many, many different ways. So the mastering engineer's job is to take this finished song that was given to him by the mix engineer and make sure that it will sound as good as it can on a variety of different playback systems. Because remember, every speaker has a different size. The bigger a speaker is, the more bass it can handle. And of course, when you listen to like little radios, like little laptop speakers or your mum's kitchen radio, those songs obviously cannot reproduce the bottom end that is necessary. So there is a lot of compromising in mastering, because when a mastering engineer sits down, and it is very important that you use a good mastering engineer, and we'll get back to that in a moment, because an experienced mastering engineer will listen to this music and he will, or she will, make the decision as to what to do. Now, mastering is really, as I say, it's a tonal balance. There's a lot they can do today thanks to music technology. But by the time the mastering engineer's got the record, we hope that the mix engineer has done a pretty good job. Hopefully, if the mix is well done, the mastering engineer won't need to do much. But of course, these days, the reality is we don't all work in big commercial studios. So a lot of us work, from home or from smaller environments. So the mastering engineer's job is to make sure that this record, this song, will sound as good as it possibly can, whether it's played on earphones or whatever the system. Now, there's always going to be a level of compromising here, because the mastering engineer might feel, okay, if I cut away a little bit of bass here, it's probably not going to sound as good on a big club system, but it will sound better on a smaller system. And this is why I always say you should use an experienced mastering engineer. And at the end of the day, technically speaking, or critically speaking, there's probably never going to be a mix which will translate 100% perfectly on every system. And of course, another subject altogether. But the mastering engineer is really taking this final record and he's doing that final balance. It's really sort of tonal balance. It's kind of like bass and treble. Is it too sharp? And with mastering engineers, that they typically make very broad moves. With mixing, it's very fine moves. It's moving that little hi-hat and tweaking it and really getting in there. Whereas with mastering, it's more just sort of like general moves, like it's a bit sharp there. Let's just bring the top end down a bit. Or the bass is a bit boomy. Let's just find that bass frequency which is going to be problematic and just drop it, or that area. So the moves made in mastering are very broad and they're not as specific as mixing. And once again, this is why a good mix engineer is so important, is because you don't want the mix by the time it gets to the mastering engineer. You don't want the mastering engineer to sort of listen to this and go, oh, I've got a hard job here. Really, at the end of the day, one should strive to make their mix so good that hopefully the mastering engineer will just listen to it and go, okay, just need to do tiny little things. And if your mix is good, then the mastering engineer will send it back and it should hopefully be louder. But it shouldn't sound any different. It'll, to trained ears, of course, there will be a difference, but it shouldn't be drastically different. And of course, this depends on your level as a mix engineer as to how good you can make the mix sound in the first place. But now, one of the misconceptions of mastering, which brings me on to that point, is mastering is not a magic fix. So on YouTube the other day, I saw this video pop up with this guy going, "Yo kid, if your mix is not banging, you want to do," he was like endorsing some kind of mastering platform. And I don't want to sort of criticize people, everyone's trying to find their way in this world and make their living. But there is this misconception with mastering services. And a lot of them, not all of them, but I've seen a lot of them, will sort of mislead you. And what I mean by that is a lot of mastering engineers or mastering services, they will put things up on their websites like, "Oh, we mastered Ed Sheeran's record," or "We mastered, Daft Punk," and they will names drop all these big names. And okay, they probably did, but you've got to understand that the person who, mixed and produced Daft Punk's album is going to probably be a very experienced, mix engineer. So don't expect your mix, if it's not done properly, to sound like that. And what I'm trying to point out here is a lot of these mastering services on the internet, a lot of them are guilty of sort of saying, "Oh yeah, send us your mix and we'll make it loud and we'll make it banging." And you guys know what I feel about loud banging music. It's all about dynamics, and thank God that the loudness wars have ended. And if there's anything great about streaming and the modern way music is consumed, is the fact that music these days can be mixed and mastered it doesn't have to be that loud, because you lose a lot of dynamics with over limiting. It's very difficult to keep this simplistic, guys. So I'm trying to keep this as general as possible. But just understand that mastering is really just a tonal balancing process. The record is finished, and the mastering engineer is just making those final tweaks. Just round. It's almost like, imagine if you'd painted a painting and it was going to be framed on the wall. So if you excuse that metaphor, the artist has painted the painting and he gives it to the framer, and this person frames it. So that's kind of really what a mastering engineer does in sort of layman's terms. He's framing the picture to make it look better, and in the mastering to make it sound better. But mastering is not magic. It does not fix. It cannot take a bad mix and make it good. And I learned this the hard way when I got into music production many years ago. Very often I'd send, you send your mix to I'd spent quite a lot I spent a lot on mastering, and I shouldn't have really. I should have spent the time trying to hone my mixing skills, because what in turn I had was I would send this mix that wasn't very good to a mastering engineer, and because a lot of them, not all of them, they're just out for the money, so they'll just master it and send it back to you. So the mix would come back. Did it sound any better? No, it was still my crappy mix. It was just louder and a little bit more balanced. But, for you, the up-and-coming music producer or, mix and aspiring mix engineer, it is so much more important to focus on the mix. That is everything. The mix is everything. I would go so far as to say that the mastering is, I'm not trying to say it's not that important, but the mix is really everything. You should really spend time on the mix. The mix is the important thing. Mastering, it's kind of like the saying, you can't polish a turd. If your mix is crap, even if it's Bob Clear Mountain or one of the fine mastering engineers at Abbey Roads, they won't be able to fix it. So you need to concentrate and hone your mixing skills. That's the most important thing. You also need to be very careful of, there's a lot of people out there on the internet that say, "Oh, send us your track and we will master it for you." And, they'll do it for like $10 or something. And once again, you might be lucky. There might be someone who you might just find the person who's an absolute prodigy and deliver you an outstanding master. But the reality is that doesn't often happen. And you've got to be careful, because people sometimes ask me, and I'm not going to mention any names, "Vaughn, what do you think of these automated mastering services, where you send your mix in?" And of course, I've tried them just out of curiosity. And I'll be honest with you, it comes back sounding louder, and there is an improvement, but I personally cannot overemphasize the need that there is to use a human mastering engineer, at least at the moment, because who knows where technology is going to take us. At the end of the day, I really feel that using a proper mastering engineer who has got experience and listens to music all the time will have a much better understanding and a better sort of ballpark view of where your song should sit within, whatever genre it is. And, should you master your own music? And I know these days, as I said earlier on, because of the way music technology has evolved and where we are now, I do see a lot of the younger producers, especially now, starting a session and just sort of doing mixing and mastering and production all at the same time. But guys, there are no hard and fast rules. A lot of the innovations through science and technology always come from people who push the envelope, people who do things that are against the grain, out of the norm. I know they say you've got to know the rules before you can break them, and that is very true. But coming back to mastering is not magic. It cannot make a bad mix good. So you really do need to spend the time in the mix and hone in on your mixing skills. Guys, I hope that made sense. As I say, forgive me, I do tend to get quite technical, and I've got to pull myself out from it. As I say, I wanted to just explain this in very general terms. So what you can take from this video really is concentrate on the mix. Another interesting thing is when I was getting into music production, I was always confused as to, where does the mix end and where does the mastering start? So I used to do things, I used to think to myself, oh, should I not make it that bright, or should I make it less compressed or less dynamic, or whatever my thought process was at the time, and thought I would leave it up to the mastering engineer. The best advice I can give you, and I got this advice from a mentor of mine many years ago, and he said, Vaughn, your job as a mix engineer producer is to make the music sound as best as you possibly can throughout every stage. And that was good advice, because really you should not be thinking, and we talk about that a lot on this channel, is how the logical mind often gets in the way while you're doing music, which is a very artistic and a creative process. And that is why in an ideal world, the artist and the producer and the mix engineer are not the same person. But anyway, the reality is these days, a lot of people are the artist, the mix engineer, the producer, and sometimes the mastering engineer. A lot of producers these days are doing everything themselves, and there's nothing wrong with that. But understand that when you're making a record, all you should ever be concerned with from the beginning right through to the end is, I'm going to make this sound as good as I possibly can. Your goal really should be that by the time it gets to a mastering engineer, the mastering engineer will listen to this and go, oh, wow, I only need to make broad moves. You don't want the mastering engineer to go, oh God, I've got to really jump in there and make all these surgical moves, because mastering should just be very broad general strokes. Concentrate on your mix. And it is always about making it sound as good all the way through. Your job as a producer, mix engineer, is to make that record sound as best as you possibly can before it goes on to the mastering. I hope this helps, guys, and leave your comments below. Let me know what you would like to say about mastering. Is there any advice you'd like to give to the community? If you're a mastering engineer, leave your comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Guys, it's always a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next video.